It wasn't the shattering revelation that broke me. It wasn't the sight of her in another man's arms. No, it was something far quieter, more insidious than any affair, any infidelity, any betrayal. It was the slow, creeping realization that I had been living a lie all along. I had been watching the signs for months, the way she started leaving her phone face down on the table, the way she seemed so distant even when we were in the same room. But I didn't want to believe it. Denial is a powerful thing, and I had built my whole life around the belief that everything, my marriage, my family, my home, was solid, unshakable. But you know what they say about life. It has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. My name is Thomas Kerrigan, and I wasn't always this suspicious. In fact, I used to be the kind of guy who believed in the fairness of the world, who thought that hard work, loyalty, and trust could carry you through anything. Samantha and I had been married for 6 years, and for most of those years, I genuinely thought we had it all figured out. I'd come home after a day at my modest office job, and she'd be there, waiting with a smile and a cup of tea. I wasn't one to expect grand gestures. I was content with small moments. Little laughs, quiet evenings, the way she'd brush a strand of hair behind her ear when she thought I wasn't looking. But something shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like the flicker of a candle, flickering just a little bit too much until one day, it snuffed out entirely. It wasn't the late nights at work. I'd given her space to pursue her career, and she appreciated it. It wasn't the occasional long weekends away with friends. I encouraged it, really. A little time apart never hurt anyone, or so I thought. But when she came home from one of those weekends, I noticed a change. She had this look in her eyes, something I couldn't place. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't sadness either. It was something more complex, something unfamiliar. I asked her if everything was all right, and she assured me it was. Just tired, she said, her voice soft, distant. Nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So I started watching. I'm not proud of it, but I did it. I began noticing the little details. She'd check her phone constantly, but she'd always hide the screen when I was nearby. She started going to the gym more often, spending longer hours there. I didn't question it at first. She had every right to take care of herself. But then, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. She had stopped wearing her wedding ring. I didn't say anything at first. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But every time I saw her bare finger, my stomach churned. We had gotten married when we were young, and our vows meant something to me. To her, too, I thought. So why was she acting like it meant so little now? One day, I decided to follow her. Not because I thought she was cheating. No, I wasn't that naive. But something inside me told me that I needed to see for myself, to uncover the truth before I let my mind run wild with assumptions. I waited for her to leave the house one Thursday afternoon. She told me she was going to pick up groceries, but I knew she had a different destination. I quietly got into my car and followed her, staying a safe distance behind. She drove in the opposite direction of the grocery store. My heart skipped a beat. I followed her for miles, trying not to lose her in the evening traffic. She finally stopped at a small, nondescript house at the edge of town. It was a modest little place, tucked between two larger homes. I parked down the street, watching through the rearview mirror. She got out of the car and walked toward the door. I could see her talking to someone inside, but I couldn't make out the details. I waited. Time seemed to stretch on forever. The whole world felt like it had stopped moving as I sat there, wondering what I was about to discover. Then, she kissed him. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. No, it was a kiss that seemed to carry years of history with it. A kiss that screamed of passion, of secrets shared in the dead of night. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I felt paralyzed. I watched as they disappeared inside together, the door closing softly behind them. That's when I realized something else, something that hit harder than the sight of her kissing another man. I hadn't seen her smile like that in months. She was happy, but not with me. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick in my lungs as I sat there, frozen in disbelief. The woman I had loved for so many years, who I had built a life with, was living a separate life I knew nothing about. And I had been so blind, so wrapped up in my own expectations, that I hadn't seen it coming. For what felt like hours, I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. I thought about walking up to that door, knocking, and confronting them both. I thought about calling her and demanding answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I drove home in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. That night, I didn't say a word to Samantha. I went through the motions, dinner, small talk, the usual routine, but the distance between us had never felt wider. She slept next to me, but it wasn't the same. There was no warmth, no connection, just a cold emptiness where our love used to be. I didn't know where to go from here. I didn't know what my next step was. But one thing was certain, I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her get away with it. I needed to understand everything, and once I did, I would decide what came next. But first, I had to know who he was. The next few days passed in a fog. I walked around the house like a ghost, my mind constantly replaying the image of Samantha with him. I'd never felt so small, so insignificant in my own life. It was as though everything I'd built up over the years had turned to dust, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had 1,000 questions running through my mind, but the one that kept resurfacing was the one I couldn't answer. Why? Why had she done this? What had I missed? Was it something I did? Was I not enough? All these doubts began to settle deep within me, feeding the anger and confusion that swirled inside. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed to know who this man was. I couldn't confront her without understanding what I was dealing with, not when the stakes were so high. This wasn't just about a fleeting affair. This was about my entire world crumbling apart. It was about trust, loyalty, and the very foundation of everything I had thought we had. So, I did what any man in my position would do. I started to investigate. I wasn't going to go in blind. I wasn't going to sit back and let things unfold at her pace. I would find out everything, even if it meant turning into someone I barely recognized. The first step was simple. I needed to know more about this house. I had watched Samantha enter it that night, and I knew it was where she'd gone when she left me. It didn't take long to figure out where it was. A quick search on my phone, and I had the address in minutes. I drove there the next day, parked a few blocks away, and watched the place from a distance. It looked like an ordinary house, nothing special. There was nothing about it that screamed danger. But that's the thing about Betrayal, isn't it? It doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary until you really look. I spent hours there, just watching. No one came or went during the time I was there, and it only made me more curious. Was he still inside? Was she? Or had they already moved on to another place? I had to know more. I needed to understand who this man was, how he had gotten so close to her, and how long this had been going on. This couldn't be a one-time thing. The next morning, I took another step. I knew Samantha's schedule better than I knew my own, and I knew she'd be at work, leaving me with a few hours to dig deeper. I had already memorized the address of the house she'd visited, but I had to find a way inside without raising suspicion. My chance came when I learned about an upcoming work event she was attending. She'd be out for most of the evening, and I knew it was the perfect opportunity to get into her email and phone records. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I had no choice. The need for answers had taken over. I went to her office, pretending to stop by for a quick visit. She was in a meeting, so I had a few minutes to browse. I knew her passwords. She'd always kept everything so transparent, so trusting. She thought she could trust me. But now, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I needed to uncover the truth, and if that meant betraying her trust to get the answers I needed, then so be it. Her phone was easy to unlock. I scrolled through her messages, each text pulling me deeper into a nightmare I wasn't ready to face. The messages were casual at first, harmless. But then I found it. A message from him, the man she had kissed. His name was David Cooper, and according to the messages, they had been seeing each other for months. My heart dropped into my stomach as I read the lines, each word more painful than the last. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. I miss you already. Tonight, I'm all yours. I'm so sorry. I wish things were different. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They were intimate, filled with longing and regret. They talked about our secret and how they couldn't wait to meet again. The last message I read made my stomach turn. Can't wait to hold you again, Sam. It's been too long. I couldn't breathe. I felt dizzy, like the walls were closing in on me. How could she? How could she do this to me? To us? My mind was racing, and I had to force myself to focus. I quickly logged out of her phone and slipped it back into her bag before she returned. My head was spinning with all the information I had just uncovered, but I still didn't have enough. I needed to know more about David. I couldn't just stop here. I needed to know where he worked, what his background was, how he was connected to her. And so, I spent the next few hours piecing together the rest of the puzzle. I found his social media profiles, his job details, everything I could about him. He was in sales, working for a company in the city. Nothing about his online presence gave me any indication of who he really was, except for the fact that he was clearly someone who had been very much involved in my wife's life. When I got home that evening, the weight of everything hit me all at once. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and betrayal. Samantha would be home soon, and I still didn't know what I was going to say to her. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not fully. I needed to gather my thoughts, to plan what came next. But as the hours passed, one thing became clear. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her slip away from me like this without knowing the full story. I would confront her, but it wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. No, this was going to be something that changed everything. And I was ready. Ready to face her, ready to face him, and most importantly, ready to finally know the truth. But first, I needed to see her face when she realized I knew. The night dragged on like a heavy fog, suffocating me with its silence. I had done what I thought I needed to do, gathered the information, understood what I was dealing with, but now it all felt incomplete. I couldn't just sit back and let it fester in my mind. I needed to confront her, to make her face the truth, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what she'd say. Was she going to apologize? Was she going to lie her way out of this? Or worse, would she try to justify it all, making me out to be the villain for questioning her in the first place? The possibilities twisted in my mind, each scenario feeling like a different nightmare. Samantha was due home in an hour. I could already feel the nerves crawling up my spine, each step closer to the confrontation making my heart race faster. I paced the living room, replaying every interaction we'd ever had. How had I not seen the signs sooner? Was I so blind to the subtle shifts in her behavior, so caught up in the everyday routines of life, that I ignored the cracks in our foundation? I thought I knew everything about her, every little detail. But now, it seemed like I barely knew who she was anymore. I could still see her face in my mind, the way she kissed him, the way she smiled at him with a kind of love I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the kind of smile you give someone just for fun. It was the kind of smile that comes from shared secrets, from time spent together when no one is watching. That was the moment I realized how deeply betrayed I was, not just by the affair itself, but by how easily she had slipped away from me, how she had let herself become someone I didn't recognize. I walked to the window and stared out at the street, the last light of the day fading as the night took over. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even. It felt so out of place compared to the storm inside my head. Everything seemed normal, but nothing was normal anymore. When the sound of her car pulling into the driveway finally broke through the quiet, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel any of the comfort I thought I would when I was finally going to confront her. No, it was more like the feeling right before you jump into cold water. Uncertainty mixed with dread, but knowing there was no turning back once you did. I had to face her. I had to face the woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew, and demand answers for the betrayal I had uncovered. The door opened, and she stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw me standing there, the tension between us immediate. I could see the slight shift in her expression, the way she tried to hide the nervousness in her eyes. It was subtle, but I noticed it. "Thomas, you're home early," she said, her voice a little too light, too casual. It almost made me sick. "Yeah, I thought we should talk," I replied, my voice flat. "We need to talk about something." She shifted her weight, clearly sensing the change in my tone. "What's going on?" "You look." Her voice trailed off as she took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing slightly. I knew she was trying to read me, but I wasn't going to give anything away. "I know about David," I said, the words finally spilling out of my mouth. It felt like the ground beneath me shifted as I said his name. "I know what you've been doing." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I saw fear flash across her features. But just as quickly, it was replaced by a look I wasn't expecting, defensiveness. "What do you mean, Thomas?" She took another step toward me, as if trying to close the space between us, but I didn't move. "You think I didn't see it?" I said, taking a step forward myself, matching her intensity. "I saw the messages. I know you've been seeing him. I know everything." She stopped, her hand frozen in midair as she reached for me. "You've been spying on me?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I've been paying attention." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. "How long, Sam? How long has this been going on?" I couldn't stop the words from spilling out, the anger I had tried to suppress coming out in full force now. How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been hiding this from me, from us? Her eyes flickered for a second, a flash of something I couldn't quite place. Shame? Guilt? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She took a deep breath and then, almost too calmly, said, I didn't want you to find out like this. Of course you didn't, I snapped. You didn't want me to find out at all, did you? You didn't want me to know what was really going on behind my back, behind this wall of lies we've been living in. You let me think everything was fine, while my words faltered, a lump forming in my throat, but I forced it down, while you were with him. I never meant for it to happen like this, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It just happened. I was unhappy, Thomas. You didn't notice. You were always working, always so distant. And don't. I cut her off, the hurt in my voice more apparent now. Don't try to justify this. You don't get to blame me for what you did. You chose him. You chose to lie to me, to betray me. She stepped back, her eyes glistening with what I could only assume was guilt, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. I know what I did was wrong, she whispered, but I didn't know how to fix it. I was lost, Thomas. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. I didn't know how to fix us. So you ran to him, I said, the words coming out like venom. You ran to another man instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix what was broken between us. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't like that. You don't understand. I wasn't trying to replace you. I wasn't trying to hurt you, but I needed someone. And he was there. I felt a coldness wash over me. A coldness I couldn't explain. I understand perfectly, Sam, I said quietly, my voice eerily calm. I understand that while I was out here, trying to keep this family together, you were out there, tearing it apart. Her silence spoke volumes. I had her cornered, and I could see the realization dawning on her. There was no getting out of this. She had made her choices, and now, there was no way to undo them. But as I stood there, facing the woman I had once loved more than anything, something changed in me. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. No, I was something else entirely now, something I hadn't been before. I was done, and I had no intention of letting her walk away unscathed from this. Not this time. Not after everything. I had made my decision. The game had changed, and I was about to flip the board. I don't know how long we stood there in the living room, locked in that strange silence. Her eyes were filled with remorse, but there was something else behind them, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't guilt, not entirely. It was more like resignation. She knew, deep down, that she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And the worst part was, I knew it too. Samantha's gaze softened as she took a step closer to me, her voice trembling. Thomas, please, don't look at me like that. I'm not some monster. I didn't want this to happen. I was confused. I thought I could fix things, but I didn't know how. Her words felt like hollow excuses, an attempt to cling to something she could no longer hold on to. The anger inside me didn't subside. In fact, it was growing. It was so thick, so consuming, that it was all I could feel. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wanted to lash out. I wanted to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But I couldn't. I wasn't going to lower myself to that level. No, I had a different plan. I don't need your apologies, Sam, I said, my voice steady, though there was a sharp edge to it now. What I need is to know the truth. The real truth. And don't feed me more of these excuses. We both know what happened here. I want to know everything. How long has it been going on? What's going on with him? And why the hell did you think I wouldn't find out? Her face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much to admit, how much to withhold. But in the end, I knew she couldn't hide it anymore. The walls had closed in around her, and there was nowhere left to run. It started about a year ago, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a moment of weakness. But one moment turned into another, and then we were spending more and more time together. He was there for me when you weren't. When you were working all the time and I was feeling alone. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words sink in. A year. She had been carrying this on her shoulders for a year, pretending everything was fine, hiding it from me. The thought made me sick to my stomach. But even worse was what came next. He's not just someone I met by accident, Thomas. He's different. He listens to me. He gets me. And when I was falling apart, he was there to pick up the pieces. I didn't want to admit it, but she stopped herself, her voice breaking. I don't know when it happened, but I started to love him. And that's the hardest part to say, because it makes me feel like I'm a terrible person. But I couldn't stop it. I tried to end it, but every time I did, he came back. And I just couldn't stay away. Her confession hung in the air between us like a heavy fog, suffocating everything else. Love. She had fallen in love with him. And that was what made everything even more painful, more real. She hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't just acted out of anger or frustration. No, she had let herself fall into something deeper, something more dangerous. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stood there, processing the enormity of her words. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been before. Now, there was just an emptiness inside me, a coldness that made it hard to think, hard to breathe. How could I compete with that? How could I ever trust her again after knowing that she had willingly chosen him over me? Finally, I spoke, my voice low and controlled. So what now, Sam? What do you expect me to do with this information? Do you think I can just forget what you've done? That I can just go on like this, pretending nothing has changed? You've crossed a line, and there's no coming back from it. She took another step forward, her eyes pleading with me, but I held my ground. Please, Thomas, don't give up on us. I know I've made a mess of things, but I still love you. You're still my husband. I know I've hurt you beyond repair, but I need you. I want to fix this. I want us to work. Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. The desperation in her voice almost made me feel guilty for not giving her the chance to explain more. But I couldn't. I couldn't let myself fall back into that trap. I couldn't let her words sway me anymore. Not after everything I had discovered. No, I said, the word coming out more forcefully than I intended. You don't get to ask for that. You don't get to come back to me after everything. You've already made your choice, Sam. And you chose him. You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to walk away from the damage you've caused just because you're sorry now. Her face crumpled, and I could see the tears starting to well up in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had seen enough. I had given her every opportunity to come clean, to be honest with me, and now I had nothing left to give. My marriage had been built on trust, and that trust had been shattered beyond repair. I don't know what you want from me, Sam. I continued, the anger rising again. You can't just tear apart everything we had, everything we built, and expect me to let it slide. I deserve better than this. We both do. I saw her bite her lip, fighting back tears, but there was nothing left for me to say. No words could undo what had been done. We were beyond talking now, beyond trying to work things out. This was it, the end. And somehow, despite the pain, I felt a strange sense of relief. Because now, I was finally free. Free from the lies. Free from the weight of trying to fix something that was already broken. I'll leave, she whispered, her voice small, defeated. I'll go, if that's what you want. I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, trying to steady my breathing. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything was fine. This chapter of my life was over, and no amount of apologies could change that. Just go, I finally said, the words feeling final, irrevocable. And as she walked out of the house, the door closing softly behind her, I felt the weight of the years we had spent together slip away. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something else, something I couldn't name just yet. But I would figure it out. Because this was my life now, and I was going to reclaim it. The house felt empty, even though I wasn't technically alone. Samantha's absence had left a coldness that seemed to seep into every corner, every room. I kept walking through the house, checking the spaces she used to occupy, half expecting to see her there, sitting on the couch, or in the kitchen, making some half-hearted attempt at a normal dinner. But no, there was nothing. It was just me now. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that forces you to confront the truth you've been avoiding. I could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. The emotional toll of the last few days had drained me, leaving me hollow. There was no anger anymore. No rage or sorrow. Just nothing. It was as if I had been so consumed by the events that when they finally played out, I didn't know what to feel. I had caught her, confronted her, and now I was left standing in the ruins of my own life. As the hours passed, my mind kept replaying the conversation we'd had. Her tearful plea for forgiveness, her desperate promises that things could be fixed, that she loved me. But none of it mattered. I couldn't take her back. I couldn't simply erase the image of her with him. I couldn't just ignore how easily she had let our relationship slip through her fingers. I found myself sitting in the same spot I had been earlier, staring at the empty space where she used to sit. The weight of it all started to sink in. I had spent so many years loving her, trusting her, and now, none of it meant a thing. And for the first time, I wondered if I had been blind to her needs. Had I ignored her? Had I pushed her into the arms of another man without even realizing it? No, it wasn't my fault. I hadn't forced her into this affair. That was on her, not me. But still, the doubt lingered. The what-ifs. The regrets. They all gnawed at me, threatening to drag me back into a spiral of self-blame. I got up and walked over to the bookshelf, absent-mindedly picking up a picture frame. It was one of those perfect moments we used to capture. Her and me on vacation, smiling, laughing, holding hands as the sun set behind us. I stared at it, feeling a pang of sadness. That was the woman I had married. The one I thought I knew. But where was she now? Who was this person who had lied to me, who had betrayed me? I could feel my hand trembling as I set the frame back on the shelf. It was then that I realized something. I was never going to get the answers I wanted from her. I had tried to confront her, to get the truth, but I was never going to get a satisfying explanation. People like Samantha didn't change overnight. She wasn't sorry in the way I needed her to be. She was sorry she got caught, and that was the difference. I needed to move on. I needed to reclaim my life. But more importantly, I needed to reclaim myself. No more second-guessing. No more wondering if I had missed the signs or if I could have done something differently. It was time to stop being a passive player in my own life. I started making plans. Not for her. Not for us. But for me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were days ahead that would test me. Days filled with memories, pain, and the weight of everything I had lost. But I would endure it. I would make it through. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for the past to change or for her to come back and fix what she had broken. That night, as I lay in bed alone, the thought of everything that had happened and everything I had learned hung in the air. The worst part was the realization that there was no going back. I could never unknow what I knew now. I could never unsee what had been done. But maybe, in a way, that was a blessing. At least I knew the truth now. At least I wasn't living in the shadows anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't had in weeks. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel defeated. No, I felt like a man who had finally shed the weight of a lie. I knew I had to start making the difficult decisions, things like getting the paperwork in order, figuring out how to tell my friends, and moving forward. I also knew that I needed time to heal, time to find myself again, without the fog of betrayal clouding my judgment. The hardest part was still ahead, though, confronting my own emotions, the ones I had pushed aside for so long. How could I move on from someone I had loved so deeply? How could I close that chapter of my life when it still haunted me? The path to healing wasn't going to be easy, but I had to walk it. For myself. For my own peace of mind. A week later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the papers in front of me. Divorce papers. The reality of what I was about to do hit me like a wave. I could feel my pulse quicken, the anxiety rising in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't know it was the right thing to do. It was the finality of it that struck me. Once I signed, once I made it official, there would be no turning back. No more what-ifs. No more chances to make things work. I took a deep breath and picked up the pen. The doorbell rang as I set the pen back down on the table. I froze. I didn't expect anyone. I wasn't ready for this. But I stood up anyway, walking toward the door, my heart pounding. When I opened it, I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe it was Samantha, come to beg for another chance. Maybe it was someone else, a friend or a neighbor, offering condolences. But what I found on the other side of the door made my stomach drop. It was David, the man she had been seeing, the one who had torn our lives apart. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking strangely calm, as if he were just another visitor. My body tensed instantly. Every muscle in me screamed to slam the door in his face, to tell him to get out and never come back. But I didn't. I just stood there, my breath caught in my throat, staring at him. He raised an eyebrow, almost as if he'd expected me to react this way. "Thomas," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly composed. "We need to talk." And just like that, the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. David stood there at the door, his presence almost surreal, like a bad dream that wouldn't let me wake up. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at him, trying to make sense of the situation. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to walk into my life like this, not after everything that had already happened. But there he was, standing on my doorstep, as if he had every right to be there. I wanted to slam the door in his face, but something inside me, some deep, primal part of me, wanted to hear what he had to say. Was he here to apologize? To tell me how sorry he was for tearing apart my life? Or was he here to gloat, to rub salt in the wounds he had already inflicted? For a long moment, I just stood there, the tension between us thick. Finally, I took a breath and stepped aside, making way for him to enter. The last thing I wanted was to invite him into my home, but something told me I needed to understand why he was here, why he felt the need to show up unannounced, without any warning. "Come in," I said, my voice as cold and steady as I could manage, though my insides were a mess of raw nerves. He nodded and walked past me, his movements casual, almost too confident. As he stepped into the living room, I couldn't help but notice how different he looked compared to the man I had imagined in my head. He wasn't the stereotypical villain I had built up in my mind. He wasn't tall or imposing. He didn't have a sneer on his face or an arrogant air about him. No, he was just ordinary. A little too ordinary for someone who had destroyed my world. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked, though the question felt meaningless. He didn't deserve the hospitality, but I couldn't just stand there in silence. I needed to break the tension. "No, thanks," he said, his tone strangely calm. "I'm not here for small talk, Thomas. I need to explain something." I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear it, but part of me knew I had to. I had to understand what was going on in his head, why he thought he could come here, into my home, and offer some explanation. "I know this is a bit unexpected," David continued, as if trying to choose his words carefully. "But I think it's important that you hear this from me, not from Samantha." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Every word out of his mouth felt like a needle being driven into my skin, slowly and painfully. "Go on," I said, barely able to keep my voice even. He looked at me for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal, and then sighed. "Look, I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't come into your life to hurt you or Samantha, but the thing is, she wasn't happy. She hadn't been for a while." I could feel the anger rising again, but I held it back. "Is that your justification?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "You think that's a valid excuse for what you did? For what you've taken from me?" David's eyes darkened. "I'm not justifying anything, but you need to understand something. Samantha, she was lost. She wasn't the same woman when I met her. She was going through something. She wasn't herself, and I didn't know how to help her, not at first. But eventually, it wasn't just about helping her anymore. He paused, glancing at me. "I fell for her." The words hit me like a freight train. He fell for her, as if it were just some innocent affair, some love story that unfolded without any consequences. As if my life, my marriage, my world had simply been collateral damage in some twisted romance. "You're really here telling me this?" I muttered, unable to control the bitterness in my voice. "You think you're some knight in shining armor? You think I'm going to feel sympathy for you after what you've done, after what you've taken from me?" David's gaze softened, almost apologetic. "No, Thomas. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to understand. But I want you to know that I didn't come here to cause more pain. I just wanted you to hear the truth. You deserve that." The truth. His truth. It was sickening. How could he stand there, acting as if he were doing me some kind of favor by sharing this pathetic justification for what he had done? My world was in ruins, and here he was, offering some watered-down explanation that didn't come close to healing the damage. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process it all. Every part of me wanted to scream, to throw him out, to punch him in the face for what he had done. But I didn't. I didn't because I knew I was done with rage. I was done with anger that only made me feel more empty. "You should go," I said quietly, finally finding the words. "I don't need your apologies. I don't need your explanations. I just need you to leave." David hesitated, his eyes searching mine, almost as if he expected me to say something different. But there was no changing my mind. The damage was done. The world I had known was shattered beyond recognition, and no amount of words or remorse would fix it. "I understand," he said, nodding slowly. I needed you to know that I never meant for things to get this far." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked toward the door, opening it for him. He looked at me one last time, his face unreadable, before he stepped out of the house. The moment the door closed behind him, I felt the last remnants of the past slip away. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't sad either. I just was. There was a finality to it, a weight that had lifted from my shoulders. I had done what needed to be done. I had heard him out. I had confronted the man who had invaded my life, and now I could move on. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least I had started walking it. Samantha had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. It wasn't going to be about revenge. It wasn't going to be about trying to win her back or make her regret what she'd done. It was about me. It was about rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I took a deep breath and walked back into the living room. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't suffocating anymore. It was just the quiet before the storm that would come next. But I would be ready. This time, I was in control. The days following David's visit were a blur of motion and stillness. On the one hand, I was going through the motions, working, eating, trying to keep some semblance of normalcy. But on the other, I felt like I was walking through a fog, with everything around me distorted, out of focus. The world was moving on, but I wasn't. Not really. Not in the way I used to. Samantha had left, but the betrayal she had dealt me still lingered, heavy in the air, suffocating every thought I had. I had tried to fill the empty space with distractions. I'd gone back to work, though I could barely focus on the spreadsheets and deadlines in front of me. I'd met up with friends a few times, but it was hard to keep up appearances. Everyone knew something was off, but no one dared ask. And I didn't have the energy to explain. How could I? How could I sit down with them and tell them what had happened, what she had done? No, it was easier to pretend everything was fine, even when the walls were slowly closing in around me. I spent the nights alone, replaying every moment, every conversation, every lie. I thought about the time she had looked at me, the way she had smiled, the way I had trusted her. I thought about the vows we had made, the promises we had shared. It all felt like a sick joke now. And yet, there was something deeper in the pit of my stomach, a sense of betrayal not just from her, but from the life we had built together. I had given everything to her. Everything. And for what? The truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. The man I had been, the man who believed in love and loyalty, was gone. The man standing here now was someone different, someone shaped by anger, by hurt, and by the crushing weight of a betrayal that had destroyed the very foundation of his existence. And for the first time in my life, I felt utterly, completely lost. That's when I decided it was time to stop pretending. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep drowning in my own thoughts, letting the bitterness consume me. I had to take control. I had to reclaim my life. The first step, I decided, was letting go of everything that tied me to her. The memories, the reminders, the pain. I spent the next few days going through the house, sorting through the past, sifting through all the pieces of a life that no longer existed. I found the old photo albums, the souvenirs from vacations we'd taken, the letters we had written to each other in the early days. I thought about burning it all, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The memories were mine, after all, and no matter how much they hurt, they were a part of me. Instead, I packed them all away. I put the photos in a box and shoved it in the back of the closet, tucked away where I wouldn't have to see them every day. I gathered up her things, the clothes, the perfume, the jewelry, and boxed them up as well. It felt like the right thing to do, like I was cleansing myself of the past, erasing everything that had once felt so real and secure. But there was still one thing left, one thing I couldn't quite bring myself to part with. It was the ring, the wedding band I had worn for so many years, the symbol of everything I had thought we were. I had taken it off the night she left, the night I had finally accepted that it was over. And now, it sat on the kitchen counter, glaring at me every time I passed by. For a while, I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of the last physical reminder of the woman who had betrayed me. But another part of me couldn't. Not yet. I couldn't tell you why. Maybe it was because I wanted to hold on to a piece of what was once beautiful. Maybe it was because I was still in denial, still clinging to the idea of who she had been, who I had thought she was. Or maybe it was because I wasn't ready to let go of the person I had been when I wore it. I didn't know, but I didn't throw it away. Not yet. The silence in the house felt different now. The emptiness was no longer oppressive. It was a space that I could fill with something new. Something for me. I was learning to be alone, but not in the way I had before. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was starting to live again, in my own way, on my own terms. But the question still haunted me. What next? I had no idea. I had no plans for the future, no idea what I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to step forward, even if it was into the unknown. The next few weeks went by in a blur. I started working out again, something I hadn't done in ages. I ate healthier. I started waking up earlier and finding things to do with my time. Things that didn't involve thinking about her, about what had been lost. I even went to the bar a few times to talk to people, to laugh, to enjoy the moments that didn't feel like a constant reminder of my pain. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I was learning to breathe again. I was learning how to move through the world without feeling like I was dragging the weight of my past behind me. But there were moments when I found myself still thinking about her, about the life we had, and those moments would knock the wind out of me. But I had learned something crucial. It was okay to feel that way. It was okay to grieve. It was okay to be angry. But it wasn't okay to let those feelings control me. I had to find a way to let go. One evening, a few weeks after everything had unfolded, I found myself sitting alone on the couch, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking at the blank screen of the television. The house was quiet. There were no distractions. And that was when it hit me, the thing I hadn't realized until now. I wasn't afraid anymore. Before, I had been afraid of what life would look like without her. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of the pain of starting over. But now, I wasn't afraid. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. There was still a long road ahead. But I wasn't going to walk it alone. I had myself now. And that was all I needed. As the days stretched into weeks, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It crept in quietly, almost imperceptibly, at first. It wasn't a loud, triumphant feeling. It wasn't a sudden revelation that everything would be perfect. But it was something real. Something I hadn't realized I was missing. The weight of the past had begun to lift, and slowly, the future started to feel possible again. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with family, and even took a few spontaneous weekend trips. I didn't have any grand plans for my life. I didn't need them. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't chasing something. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just living in the moment, learning to appreciate the small things, the sound of laughter, the warmth of the sun on my face, the joy of a quiet evening at home, with nothing but my own company for comfort. I hadn't thrown away the wedding ring. It still sat on the kitchen counter, but now, when I looked at it, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the bitterness that had initially surged through me. I simply saw it for what it was, a symbol of a time in my life that had ended. It wasn't a sign of failure. It was a lesson, and it was time to let go. A few months later, I woke up one morning feeling lighter. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a decision I had made overnight. It was just a realization. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually starting to thrive. I had begun to rebuild the pieces of myself that had been shattered, and in doing so, I had found a new strength, a resilience that I hadn't known I had. And then, one day, as I was out walking in the park, I bumped into someone. It wasn't a chance meeting. It felt different. There was something about her smile, something about the way she looked at me, that caught my attention. We exchanged pleasantries, then a bit more. It was lighthearted at first, simple, but there was a spark, a connection that felt easy, natural. Her name was Emily, and I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this kind of chemistry with someone. It wasn't like the whirlwind romance of my past. It wasn't some desperate attempt to fill the void left by Samantha. No, it was different. It was calm, grounded. It was the kind of connection that felt real, without the pressure of expectation or baggage. We talked for hours, and by the end of our conversation, we both agreed to meet up again. I had no idea where it would lead, but that didn't matter. For the first time in so long, I wasn't looking for answers. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me or to fill a hole inside me. I was just enjoying the company of someone who made me feel seen, who appreciated me for who I was right now, not who I had been or who I was supposed to be. As the days went by, Emily and I grew closer, but I took things slow. There was no rush. I wasn't chasing a relationship. I wasn't looking for anything to validate me. What I was doing was building a life for myself, one step at a time. And Emily, well, she was a part of that. She was part of a future that I was beginning to imagine, a future where I could be whole on my own terms. One evening, months after that first meeting, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, smiling at the reflection that stared back at me. The man I saw was not the broken, betrayed husband I had been. He wasn't the man who had been consumed by hurt and revenge. No, he was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned to let go of the past and embrace the future. And that future, I realized, was mine to shape. I picked up the ring from the kitchen counter, looked at it one last time, and placed it in a drawer, closing it gently. It didn't need to be a weight around my neck anymore. It didn't need to be a reminder of pain. It was simply a chapter of my life, one that had ended, but one that had taught me more about myself than I could have ever imagined. The door to my past was closed, but the door to my future was wide open. I didn't know exactly where that road would lead, but for the first time, I was excited to find out. And with that, I stepped forward.